As we start a new year, I thought it would be fun to do a little reflection and take a look back at the sketchbook pages I created in 2023. With this flip through, I wanted to share with you the power of prompts and how they inspired each page. And if you'd like to get prompts, ideas, and inspo throughout the year, learn more about my Creative Spark newsletter. I'll tell you more about it after the flip through, and you can find all the details in the description below. All of the prompts I used in 2023 were from the Creative Spark newsletter. I put the emails together, but I'm a participant as well. I didn't prepare anything, and I didn't go into it knowing what I would do. I worked through each prompt in real time along with my community of subscribers. And here's what I ended up filling my pages with. We started off with a warm-up exercise to take inventory of what supplies we had on hand. I had a ton of stuff that I don't use often, so I decided to use it on this page. The different supplies I used were markers, watercolors, embroidery thread, palette knives with acrylic paint, another kind of marker that I had, and stamp pads. I shared this exercise because I wanted us to ease into the year with something simple and helpful. Doing this is also a good chance to test everything out and see what you want to continue using and see what things you might need to throw away. My favorite part was coming up with different ways to fill in each square, and I love how colorful this page turned out. On the back of each page, I try to write down the exercise or prompt and some notes on what I did. So while I was cleaning out my supplies, I found some really old flower stamps that I carved a long time ago. I decided to pull them out and use them again. I started off by making a colorful watercolor background, and I let that dry completely before using permanent ink with my stamps to stamp the images on top. So the first prompt for 2023 was vision. And the first thing that came to mind for me was to create a vision board. I felt like one page wouldn't be enough for this, so I taped some pages together with washi tape so that they would unfold and I would have more space to create my vision board on. I added a lot of scenes of travel and nature, and I included Valentine in there, as well as words that I felt connected to, things that represented health and wellness, spaces I liked, and basically places I wanted to be in, see, and explore. The crazy thing is that a lot of the things I put on here actually came true. I traveled to a bunch of places that look just like these images. I'm definitely going to make one for 2024. I find this process very relaxing and fun. The second prompt that we explored and interpreted was messy. The idea for this prompt came to me when I saw a picture of Francis Bacon's studio. I feel like anyone who sees it has some sort of emotional reaction to it, and I thought that was really important and worth taking a deeper dive into. At first, the image really stressed me out, but then it made me want to actually embrace messiness. This idea to recreate that picture of Francis Bacon's studio in this top picture here and use markers, crayons, and rough textures and messy strokes. I used my fingers, I smudged things around, and I actually really like how it turned out. I decided I wanted to try it again with a second image. So this bottom picture is actually a picture of a junk drawer that I found, and I decided to use the same technique to recreate that image. I really like this process in capturing a picture in this messy and perfect way. I had another idea I wanted to try, so I made a second page for messy, and it was inspired by getting messy, being free, and having fun. I started off by pouring paint on this page, and I used brushes and finger painted, dripped and flicked stuff on here, colored in spots with markers, and went in without any plans or idea of how it would turn out. It turned out to be one of my favorite pages, and I hope it inspires you to get messy. The next prompt was connect. It reminded me of my own creative journey and all the different things that led to the next, and how they are all connected and have influenced me. Tore up different pieces of fabric and papers to represent the different areas of art I've focused on. I went to college for fashion design, so I started with pieces of fabric that are from me and my friend's little girl's clothing line that we had. The next thing I dabbled in was hand-carved stamps and creating cards with them. And that led me to brush lettering and calligraphy. I eventually found my way back to painting, which was my first love, and I began with black and whites and neutrals, and now I'm exploring color. Then I used embroidery thread in the center to connect all the torn pieces together. This was my initial rough sketch of the connect idea, so I added it to the back of the page. Then this next page was inspired by the prompt crush. I wanted to crush different things on here with a hammer, but this one didn't really end up how I pictured and was a little bit underwhelming. The things that I was crushing didn't really react how I thought it would. But if I ever find anything I think would be cool to crush, I'm gonna add it to this page. Since that didn't work out, I went to my second idea for crush, which was to put dots of paint on the page and then crush it with a sheet of acrylic. It was fun to push the paint down and watch it smush into different shapes and mix together. There was a lot of paint left on the acrylic, so I kept pressing it down to make more imprints. The prompt for this next page was unexpected. I was thinking about the element of surprise and having different flaps that lift up. I felt like it was an unexpected thing to add to a sketchbook, and opening each one to see what is on there is also unexpected. I used the different phases of a flower as additional inspiration for what the flaps would reveal. When all the flaps are closed, they represent soil. This is where the seeds are going to be planted and where the journey begins. I used different techniques and tools like collage and drawing with markers to make patterns that represented the seed. Then as you continue to open up the flaps, we go to the next phase where there are seedlings and little sprouts growing from the dirt. I wanted to get a texture that felt like real dirt, so I mixed some acrylic paint with baking soda to create this flap. Then there are different seed patterns, and then as you keep opening the flaps, we get more greenery. There are also more representations of dirt like in this ombre and with marker and also with this collage piece here. And as we keep going, our little seeds have gotten the rain and water that they need to sprout into flowers. So these last flaps have blooming flowers on them. I painted some, I did some collage, and I also stamped some. This took a while to make because there are so many different elements and paintings and drawings, but I really love how it came together. This is one of my favorites because I was able to execute this idea I had in my head into real life. And I really love the tactileness of this piece. It can be a little bit tricky folding it back, but here we are at the beginning again. Then after unexpected, our next prompt was message. I thought about what words I wanted to express, and I chose dream, explore, and create. And my idea was to take these words and make 3 different versions of it. So this first version is done with brush lettering. The next version that I created was a digital collage, and it's the first one I made, and it was actually really fun putting it together. I lettered on my iPad in Procreate to create the text in the center, and then I layered images that I had taken as the background. And the third version was a collage and creating the different fonts, adding the little images, and seeing it all come together. Here are all 3 versions side by side. The next prompt was gather. I was on a road trip during this prompt, and so I gathered all the different receipts, papers, and things that I came across during my trip and then put it together in a living journal. I also included a page where I wrote down all the different places that I went to on the different days because I feel like I'm not going to remember later on, so it's nice to have this here. The prompt after gather was the written word. And it really made me think of how I could incorporate text and words into a piece. I settled on the word energy because it was something that was coming up in my life at the time of not entertaining negative energy and protecting our energy. I started off by writing the word, and then I layered paint onto it, added different quotes about energy, and basically kept layering and adding to it, covering it, and then putting more stuff on until I felt like it was finished. I really wanted to create a vibrant page that had movement and that really reflected energy. And this is a page that I ended up with. It was now around April, so I decided to share the prompt Mother Earth in honor of Earth Day. I really wanted to use actual elements from the earth, so first I covered the page in watercolor in greens and browns, and then I took leaves and then pressed them into the watercolor while it was wet. Then I let it dry completely before peeling it off. It created this really cool texture where the leaves were, and then I used embroidery to outline the shapes. I really want to try this technique again and see if I can get better impressions next time. The prompt for the next couple of pages is mix. I really just wanted to play with paint and mix it together and see what would happen. I don't know if you can tell, but I put a lot of acrylic paint on this page, and then I used a palette knife to smush everything around, mix it together, make little swirls and dents, and just played around with it to see what I could create. I love the thick texture and all the little lines and tiny swirls that it made. This page reminds me of unicorns and magic and cotton candy. I love a classic black and white color combo, so I decided to do the same thing with those colors. So I started with white on the bottom and black on top, and then mixed it together in the middle to get some grays. And I also added some gold leaf on there for a little bit of shine. I did this one more time because I felt like it would work really well with clouds and water and the sky in mind. I used the same technique, and I think this came out more like water than the sky, but I love taking a closer look and seeing how the paint dried, all the little swirls and lines that are in it. And that kind of leads perfectly into our next prompt, which was movement. It immediately reminded me of dancers, so I really wanted a piece that represented the way dancers move. I found a picture of a dancer to use as reference, and then I swiped acrylic paint to create the movement of the skirt, her legs kicking up, the flow of her hair, and the movement this dancer is creating. It was now summertime, so inspired by summer break, the next prompt was destination. The first place I decided to travel to was Bali. The fruits there are so colorful and pretty, so I decided to do a quick sketch with watercolor. I laid down the watercolor first and then went over it with a black pen. I painted and drew a mango, some star fruit, coconut, and some other goodies that you can find there. This isn't my usual style, but it was fun to do something different. For the next page, I was inspired by the beautiful photos that I saw of the rice paddies in Bali. It's so cool to see the different formations of these rice paddies and the different colors and lines that you can find in them. I used watercolors for this page and let them flow and mix together. The next place that I picked for destination was Marrakesh, Morocco. So for this prompt, I did some research. So I looked up pictures of Marrakesh and read about it, and the thing that stood out to me were the tiles. I decided I wanted to create tiles of my own, so I cut out squares and then I used tape to block off the design and then added the watercolor to it. And after it was all dry, I got to peel it off, which was so satisfying, and then glue it down onto my page. I think this would be really cool to try on a big piece of paper with a lot of painted tiles. The last place I decided to visit for destination was Interlaken, Switzerland. The waters there look so beautiful, and they also get snow there in the wintertime, so I decided to paint with ice for this page. I started by putting ice onto the paper and then dripping a lot of watercolor paint on top of it. I let it dry naturally, and these are the shapes that I created. It's a lot of fun to collaborate with the ice and paint this way because I never know how it's going to turn out, but I really love the formations and the colors and the different shades of blue that I got from this ice painting technique. So to wrap up the prompt destination, I decided to create one more piece, and it's inspired by my love of travel and wanting to go out and explore the world. I was working on another project at the same time, and I was printing out pictures and found this picture of my foot. I thought it was actually the perfect starting point to represent me walking into the world and going to different places. So I started with my foot, and then I found different images of landscapes, maps, and different places I'd love to go. Then I added the embroidery thread to sort of tie it all together and get the point across of traveling to different parts of the world. This page is a little bit more personal, and I love what it represents. The prompts for the next few pages are going to be from the Summer Sketchbook Unslump. It's a free 5-week email prompt series that I created to help us beat the summer slumps. The first thing we did was warm up by creating a stroke. Then I started adding elements that I used throughout the 5-week challenge onto this page, but I kind of stopped, so this page is unfinished. But I might come back to it later and add more items to it. After this warm-up, our official prompt was play. I thought this would be a fun prompt to explore. Thinking back on my childhood, I loved to play with bubbles, so that's what I used as a first element on this page. So you can kind of see it in the background there. But I mixed paint with liquid dish detergent, mixed it up, and then blew bubbles in a cup with a straw. Then I used a straw to transfer the bubbles onto the page, and then I let it dry, and it actually made all these really cool circular shapes. I also had a lot of fun cutting out this piece of paper, and so I added that on top. The prompt for this next page is curiosity. I'm looking at this page right now and realizing that this also fits in with the prompt of curiosity because you might be curious about what's underneath these craft flaps. So let's find out. So the thing that I was most curious about and what was the inspiration behind this page was AI generated art. I hadn't looked into it or done anything with it before, so I decided to put in the prompt, curious, unfinished drawing, and let AI generate something for me to work with. And so it came up with this cute hobbit, forest, fantasy-like treehouse with birds around it. And so I decided to create a collage with that theme. And I was hoping that the hand-torn edges would balance out the AI computer-generated image. The scene felt like it should be tucked away in a little nook in a secret forest. So that's when I got the idea to add the flaps and then also add some natural elements to the craft paper and have it be hidden away for someone to discover. Then the prompt following curiosity was pattern. I decided to interpret this one literally and covered this page with as many different patterns as I could think of. I started off by using a hot glue gun stamp 2 ways, so that's what these markings are. And the impressions and shapes that it left reminded me of a beehive, so I decided to go with that theme. I used my hand-carved stamps to create flowers for the bees. Then I created patterns on separate pieces of paper that I tore up and then added on here. So this is one of my favorite pieces, and I used actually something from my toolbox to stamp these circles, and then I tore up the paper and added it to this page. I also used brush strokes and tried to keep the same shape, and then I added a hand-drawn bee to it. I love how the gold adds that extra element of shine. The prompt that inspired the next couple pages is flow. So for this page, I decided to go with a flow, and I started by just closing my eyes and scribbling with a crayon and then with a marker and just going over the page. After that, I went over everything with water, and I again closed my eyes and just made sort of sweeping movements across the paper. Sometimes it doesn't matter what your final piece looks like or what ended up on your page. It's about the process and whether you enjoyed it or not. Continuing with the prompt of flow, I decided to try that exercise where you draw something without lifting your pen so it's one continuous line. I used my left hand as a model, and I just kept drawing and tried to create the shape of my hand. This is a really fun exercise to try, and even though it's not perfect, I'm glad I gave it a go. For the last prompt in the 5-week Summer Sketchbook Unslump series, I like sharing the word self. Self can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, but I really love the idea of making a self-portrait every year. I know self-portraits can seem really daunting because it feels like we have to draw an exact picture of ourselves, but there are actually a lot of different ways that we can do this. I was inspired by the different layers that make up who we are, and created a self-portrait based on that. I did end up doing a drawing because it's something I want to practice, but if I didn't want to do that, I could have done something else with it, like what I did with the other silhouettes. I did do a full tutorial on how to create this layer self-portrait, so if you're interested, you can take a look at that video. And that wraps up the 2023 Summer Sketchbook Unslump. That was a more intensive 5-week series, and so now I'm moving back to having prompts twice a month, so we have a little bit more time to work on each one. So after those 5 weeks, the next prompt was ease, because I thought we could ease back into things. I wanted to do something relaxing and easy, so I decided to take my paintbrush and just paint wavy lines across this piece of paper. I only used one shade of blue, but I love how there are spots that are darker and lighter, and also when they layer, you can see them overlapping. I wanted to see how this would look in color, so I made another one using colors inspired by the sunset. And I drew lines across the paper and let the different colors layer. I do like this version with the color, but I was a little impatient and I didn't let each stroke dry. So here you can see it kind of smeared, but here it's clean edges because the smeared part was still wet when I went to put the next line on top. But now I know, and I want to try this technique again. There are 6 more prompts after this one, and the next is season. It was the start of fall and I was in Oregon, and I felt like it was the first time I really got to experience autumn. All of the leaves were so beautiful and they were changing color. I did a simple pencil sketch, added watercolor, and then went over again in pencil to darken up some of the lines. I decided to make one more page for season inspired by my entire trip in Oregon. When I first arrived, I started gathering little flowers, greenery, and leaves to press. So by the end of the trip, they were ready to be used. And so I did some shadow drawings, and then I glued some of the pieces onto my page. I also used some of the leaves to make imprints, and then I created a list of all the places that I went. I wanted to add some texture and was inspired by the trees and the bark and the wood that was around me. And I also added some blues and greens, and of course a sketch of a deer because I loved seeing them while I was there. Now we were getting close to Halloween, so the next prompt that I shared was dark. I had this idea to gather all the supplies that I had that were black and then use them to fill up a page. I had no plan with this one, I just started grabbing things and using them. So the first thing I used was a rectangular stamp pad, and so basically what I did was just take it and stamp it onto the page. And I love how it made these rectangle shapes and there's a lot of texture inside them. So after that I went in and just filled up the empty spaces with crayon, markers, ink, and I also did some like cross hatching and try to create some texture. This next prompt was also Halloween inspired, and it was Unearth. What I love about prompts is that you can take them in so many different directions. You can do something spooky or creepy for Halloween, but I decided to do something that was inspired by potatoes since they grow underground. I made stamps out of the potatoes and created a scene with dirt, leaves, and flowers to represent seeds coming out of the earth. This brings us to November, and the next prompt was gratitude. I worked outside of my sketchbook for this one and created a piece using pressed leaves and flowers that I collected throughout my trip. I wanted to give this to someone that I'm grateful for, so I took a picture of it so I could add it to my sketchbook that way. My favorite part was how this greenery dried, and it ended up matching the loops in the embroidery thread. The next prompt that I shared and interpreted was Metamorphosis. I chose this prompt because it was fall, it was almost the start of the new year, and I felt like so many changes were happening in the world around us, in nature, and within us. I made a background where the blue morphed into the purple, and then I added different types of butterflies onto this piece. I made this butterfly a little bit more messy with looser lines and mixing different colors. Then I did a drawing of a butterfly that was cleaner and more detailed. I also added a cocoon and put tracing paper on top of it to give it a more cocoon-like feel. There are 2 more prompts left for 2023. The first one is warmth. I really liked the black monochromatic page that I did earlier, and so I wanted to do the same thing that I did here, but with the color red. Red is a color I rarely use, but I felt like it was perfect for warmth. And in my mind, while I was making these marks, I was thinking about fire and flames. I'm really loving these monochromatic pages. Even though it's created with just one color, I feel like there's still so much interest and texture. I think I want to make a piece like this for all the colors. And that brings us to our final prompt and final sketchbook page of 2023. The prompt was reflection. I decided to reflect on all the different pieces I made this year. So I printed out pictures of each of the pages, cut them into strips, and then wove them together. Then I added some embellishments like embroidery thread and paint to try to create more texture and a little bit of shine on this piece. I think this was a good design and piece to wrap the year up with. And I love how all my past pages came together to create this new piece. And that is my last sketchbook page for 2023. I still have a handful of pages left in this sketchbook, so I think I'll be able to finish it in 2024. And speaking of 2024, the Creative Spark newsletter is about to start its new cycle for the year. In these newsletters, I send out thoughtfully curated prompts along with ideas and inspiration to help you interpret and express them. What I truly believe this newsletter provides is inspiration and a way for us to make creating a priority. We have a loose and flexible schedule, and you're always encouraged to do what feels best for you. I feel like if I hadn't had these prompts, I wouldn't have made creating a priority. And if I hadn't done that, there would have been so many ideas I would have missed out on, and a lot of things I never would have tried. If the Creative Spark newsletter sounds like something you might be interested in, I invite you to learn more and to join me. All the details and links are below. I hope you enjoyed this flip through and that I gave you some ideas to try. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I get to create with you soon. Happy 2024. I hope your year is off to a great start.